Yeah, I'm here with Don't Worry, and you were someone that I just met on my comments section, and we were having some good back and forth about the topic of religio-nationalism
Mm,
as opposed to ethno-nationalism, which is what I usually have talked about. Now that I think there is something going on currently post Donald Trump election, which is that you have sort of the alt right and the alt light figures kind
mm,
of splitting off, and the alt right talks about values and as being the primary thing that's important, whereas the ethno nationalists care more about race and race realism, that type of thing. So, yeah, I understand that you have gone through the university system, so you were kind of in the thick of it. But I just wanted to point out that we do have there's quite a bit of overlap. So when we talk about this,
definitely.
it's kind of just talking about specifics. But why don't you tell me your background and where you're coming from on this issue?
Hmm. I guess well, my background is I studied finance and marketing for my undergraduate degree. Technically, my degree is a degree in international business administration, and I went to an international business school abroad, specifically to interact with people from different countries. And my hope at that young age was to be one of the sort of traveling businessmen you see on TV with hotels and all sorts of assets everywhere. And so I went to an international business school. I made many friends from different cultures, quite unlike who you might meet in the United States. The reason being that the people I met at my international business school, they were not economic immigrants. These were people coming to the West to figure out what to do with the money their families had amassed. Among my friends include the rich Arab oil families, the Communist Party families of China. And so this gave me a different look at how things work in different countries and in different cultures. I think a unique look that I believe the American political sphere could benefit from. Furthermore, I've also always been a history nerd, and I couldn't help but notice that there have been several times throughout history wherein what we call nations overlapped ethnicities, and they have been quite stable until a new ideology was introduced into the mix. And this calls me to value religion a little more than race in terms of creating, I guess, domestic stability. And the reason I value religion a little more than race is, well, I guess it's an inherent belief. I believe that ideals affect behavior. People will do what they perceive as good. And so long as everyone in the population has has a general or common perception of what is good, then people will agree on laws, people will agree on ethics, people will agree on mannerisms. However, when a contrary perception of good and bad spreads through the population, as that contrary perception spreads and empowers in the population, you will start to see conflicts wherein people are trying to assert their conflicting ideals of what is good. And so this made me lean more towards religio-nationalism.
Right. Um, Now, a lot of people, and myself included, when they hear the term, it really isn't something that's talked about very much. And a lot of people probably think of the word theocracy when they hear
Hmm.
that. So, for you, is there a distinction between those two terms?
Absolutely. Theocracy means that the government is inherently religious. And an Islamic caliphate would be a theocracy. A Catholic state, or the Vatican City, is technically a theocracy. However, when I refer to religio nationalism, I'm simply referring to a concept that if people of the same inherent beliefs occupy the same physical space or sovereign area, within those sovereign areas, we would have much less instability, much less conflict, much less protest, and we have much less problems outside of those sovereign areas, as people who view the world differently would no longer directly interact with each other unless they mean to. In other words, you, with your set of beliefs, would not come across someone with a different set of beliefs unless you were going to their country, in which case you know where you're going.
And as far as the role of government in a religio-nationalist society, do you think it goes beyond, say, who is allowed into the country?
Uh, I think the role of government comes second to the mainstream ideal, secondary, or is a consequence of the mainstream ideals of the population, especially if they are physically grouped together according to beliefs. A predominantly Christian nation is inclined to have a democracy because their beliefs are conducive to a democracy. A predominantly Muslim nation is inclined to have a caliphate or an Islamic democracy like Egypt, for example, because their beliefs are inclined to this type of government. I believe that if the world were hypothetically divided such that people of similar beliefs were grouped into the same sovereign areas, we would see a bunch of different governments manifest. And within those governments, there'd be entirely different systems in place. However, I ultimately believe that the government will manifest what the populations desire, and the populations generally desiring the same thing due to religio-nationalism will be happy with this.
Hmm.
If I can give an example,
Okay.
today the United States is fighting the Taliban. We've been fighting the Taliban for a very long time. In fact, if you hear Afghanistan on the news, the next thing you expect to hear is Taliban. We're fighting the Taliban. But why is it that we're still fighting the Taliban? Why don't they seem to go away? Well, according to Pew Research, which I remember from about 2 years ago, something like 87% of local Afghanis do not consider the Afghan government, which our state recognizes, to be the legitimate government of Afghanistan. They actually consider Al Qaeda to be the legitimate government of Afghanistan, and they prefer Sharia law according to Al Qaeda's interpretation of Sharia law. And this is why we can't get rid of the Taliban. They are actually the chosen representatives of the population who believes that they are manifesting their religious ideals in government. And that's it. Likewise, in the United States, we are increasingly seeing conflict, what is right, what is wrong, abortion, women's rights, men's rights. And this is coming from a change in the morality or arguably spirituality of the American population. There is no longer an agreement on what is right, what is wrong, and thus the differing sides are fighting over what kind of society they would like to live in.
Yeah, I suppose you're saying there's something that because I actually don't think it's a bad thing disparate to have disparate values like within the same society, but those values can't be antithetical to each other. And so I remember when you were commenting, you were talking about how like religion it's about God, it's about who we are and where we come from,
Hmm,
that sort of spiritual nature. Um, and one thing that a lot of people say when they're talking about America is that oh, America, um, we were founded to be this beacon of this mixing pot, and we wanted freedom for everyone, and we just wanted people to come here and do whatever they wanted and have unlimited freedom. But that's a very simplistic view. You know, it was
definitely.
Christians, like the Puritans in particular, coming to um, get away from oppression of their religion and to found a new society that's based on their beliefs.
Their beliefs. Yeah, if I may put that more in religio-nationalist terms, because for me, the value of religion is that it is just a solid, written uh, base of ideals. people of the same religion will vary on ideals a little bit. They will not vary anywhere near as much as radical liberals and alt-right people. Never, because they have the same base ideals. So, with the case of the Puritans, for example, they were Christian. The people, the lands they were leaving were Christian theocracies. However, what was the problem? They believed that government and life should be different than the people in the countries they left, or than the governments in the countries they left. So ultimately, it was an interpretation of the religion that caused them to separate. And we see this time and again. Um, my big example on something that I'm working on now, which, if anyone in my school hears this example, they might just pinpoint my voice. But what really made me focus on religio-nationalism was my study of ancient Rome. Rome had three connectors of society that made the society stable: roads, rules, religion. We are physically connected, we understand the same laws, and we believe the same things. And in this way, the society is stable. And Rome worked across ethnicity, which really made me lean more ethnicities, which really made me lean more to religio-nationalism than ethno-nationalism. Up until the 8th century, about two-thirds of Rome was out of Europe. Romans very much looked at themselves as a Mediterranean empire. All of North Africa was Rome. All of the Fertile Crescent and Asia Minor was Rome. And at this time, the North Africans, they weren't, sort of mixed black as they are now. If we look at the paintings and the sculptures that still exist from the area, the North Africans were then black. Like, they had the black features, right?
Hmm.
So what I found interesting in my study is that prior to the 8th century, I'm not seeing any indicators of Rome, of what we now call racism or ethnocentrism in Rome. Hold on. In the culture, it just doesn't seem to exist. And it's not like they weren't exposed to each other. Why don't they care that a good third of their land is in Africa, in black land, with a bunch of blacks in there? And because there was no general overriding conflict. Though the blacks looked black, they spoke Latin, they had Roman names, they were Catholic, they traded, and no one really seemed to notice. Moor, which I'm arguing now for one of my theses, the word Moor, which now means black and also means Muslim, originally simply referred to any Roman from the province of Mauritania, which is now basically where Morocco is. In fact, the word Africa originally referred to any Roman from the province of Africa, which is now where Tunis is. This was a specific term. What happened? Religion happened. Islam burst out of Arabia in the 8th century, conquered all of North Africa, and within 90 years, all the black Romans were suddenly jihadists. The Moors invaded Spain. The Barbers were pirating the Mediterranean. This attack lasted 1,100 years. And obviously, we are not getting along anymore. You're trying to kill us, right? So, what happened? Well, jihadis lie. I, as a European, could not trust a black who said he was Christian because he might actually be a Muslim and he might kill me. This happened in Spain on the European coast several times where a former Roman still speaking Latin came and said, "Hi, brother," traded, did the normal routines, and then in the night they just get up and kill the town because they're jihadis. And I believe that it is 1,100 years of this endless jihad, endless Barber piracy, nearly endless invasion of Spain that ultimately made us look at race because we had to look at race. We could not feel safe around the blacks because we didn't know if they were here to kill us or not. Prior to the 8th century, we had no mention of race despite the fact that a third of the Roman Empire is in North Africa and we're clearly trading. Their senators are from their provinces. Right? No one's noticing this. After this massive jihad that literally divided along the Mediterranean, all land south of the Mediterranean became Muslim, became caliphates. They were Barber pirates. All land north of the Mediterranean was still Christian, still being bombarded by these pirates. 1,100 years, 55 generations later, we don't like blacks anymore. I think this is where the racial identity, particularly for us, really stuck in. And what I'm using to prove this now in my thesis is the change of the name. African no longer referred to someone from that part of what we now call North Africa. Now African refers to all blacks because we don't trust them and we hate them because they're trying to kill us.
It is kind of amazing with
Yeah?
I've heard that this isn't the first time I've heard that whites basically invented the word Africa,
No, it's a
and
Roman word. It's just the transition of the word is what I'm focusing on. From an African was like a Texan, all right? Africa was a Roman province where Tunis was. It was limited to that land. Those are the Africans. This is like a Texan, right? Now imagine for a second. I know you're on Eastern Coast time, so imagine for a second all of the South and all of the Midwest are conquered by Islamists. Everyone in Texas is now a jihadi. What does the word Texan mean 1,100 years from now? What do we think of Texans 1,100 years from now? We definitely no longer look at them as our boys with good values. We're afraid of them. Now imagine all Texans look alike. Do you
what do you
see?
mean? You mean like they killed the cowboys and stuff, or
No, imagine all Texans that are now fighting us. Imagine they look alike. What do we feel about people that look like that? This is what I think happened between our race and the black Africans. All right, they turned around. We were getting along in the Roman Empire. You know, we had the Punic Wars with Carthage. Despite the Punic Wars, we don't mention ethnicity. We have respect for the Carthaginians. We have 5 Punic Wars with them. Eventually, we assimilate them into the Roman Empire, and there's peace in the Roman Empire. The only skirmishes are at the edges of the Roman Empire, the Goths or other Europeans, for example, right? Or in the south, you know, the different African tribes beyond our borders that every once in a while they want to invade. But there's peace within the Roman Empire, and it's not until that 2/3 of the Roman Empire that was out of Europe was conquered by Islam in the 7th century. Therefore, all of the Africans become jihadis. All of North Africa is the Barbary Coast and are fighting us for 1,500 years. And by the end of this 1,500 years, we hate blacks. I think this is where racism came from. And I see that before this divide of religion or belief or how to behave, everyone got along. And I'm seeing this again in Europe today. Europe, up until the masses of migration, there wasn't much racial tension in Europe. But when you let in the masses of migrants who don't hold your values, who are coming from the middle of Afghanistan or the poor parts of Egypt, where it's like, the mosque is the only thing they've learned anything. Of course, they're playing the rape game in the middle of the street. This is what they believe in. There was blacks in Europe before. In fact, I believe there are many blacks left in Europe after World War II. There was no problem. These were American blacks who were seen as heroes. They were largely Christian, and they integrated into that society. But now these new blacks, they don't have what we would call values. And of course, they're acting according to their beliefs. And now, how does the European feel? We have rape, the migrants that are raping. We don't care really that the migrants that are raping, they're named Mohammed or Abdul. We just know if he looks like that, he's probably a rapist. And this makes us feel insecure. But it misses the point because religion does not care about ethnicity. As I said in the Facebook comments, we have enough white Muslims now, and they act like the other Muslims. The Chechens are crazy. The Bosnians are crazy. The Albanians, they are known to be the gangsters who are running prostitutes all around Europe. Is it because they're white? No. But yet they all do it. Why? Well, they're Muslim, and they're doing what the other Muslims do.
okay? Well, somebody might push back on that and say, well, right now we don't have these huge. Well, we have terrorism, but we don't have huge conflicts between the religions. What would you say to someone who
I
hears you
would
talking about
say,
this? Wait, let me finish. Hears you saying that the we have this tension between the races. What's to stop that from just getting transferred to tension between religion?
I would say that from our Western secular perspective, wherein we are just looking at people and associating them. Okay, the blacks in Chicago, they're crazy. They're shooting everyone. And this is what the blacks, we see them on TV. They're always shooting someone. So naturally, when we see one in person, we have a reason to be afraid he might shoot us, right? But I'd say we're not looking deep enough here, and we're not looking from the perspective of the people who really want to kill us. The Muslims that I've talked to are more than happy to let us be racist so that we don't look at them. The Boston bomber, no one thought he was going to do anything. It's a good white boy. Kaboom. And
It's a Trojan horse.
what?
Like a Trojan horse, you mean?
Not even Trojan horse. I mean, there's a site called Memory TV, which I'm sure many of your followers are aware of, wherein there's a radical sheikh says practically in America, is during the Bush administration. The Bush, they are racist. They trust anyone who looks like them. No problem. We have Muslims that look like them. You see that? And now, what is the mentality? Not only is that a Trojan horse, but I think it also, depending on your belief, it divides you from people who may actually think like you. I can't help but think of the difference between the blacks in the 50s and the blacks today. Now, in the 50s, they were largely separated. They just come off the era of actual segregation as opposed to Black Lives Matter segregation. And yet they were doing good when there were actually laws that limited them instead of laws that basically got you into college for free because you're black, right? When there are actually laws that limited them, they were doing good. And it's definitely not because the laws limited them. That just doesn't make sense. Why were they doing good? And how is it that they were able to produce these Martin Luther Kings and Malcolm X's and Black Panthers? How did they do that? The people who are in Chicago today, how did they do that back then? Well, Malcolm X may be an exception, but these blacks, they went to church, they had jobs, they stayed married to their wives, and they did it because they held our values. They had our names even. The blacks were named David and Matthew. Now they're, Rashid, whatever weird names they have, Raquan, right?
Shakira, yeah.
Yeah, and listen, when you hear someone's name is Raquan, you kind of already know that A, he's not Christian, right? Most likely. I mean, I guess now the blacks they are, but we know what kind of values he was brought up in. Raquan probably doesn't know his dad. Probably. You,
Right.
you see that, but names, ironically, when you travel, are indicative of religion. I remember actually, I was talking with a girl. She was East African. She was an Arabian East African girl, and I was talking to her about my friend. His name was Masrul. It's one of the Arab guys. And I said, yeah, I'm working with this guy named Masrul. She looked at me and said, oh, that's a Muslim name. Be careful because you're not Muslim. If he gets you in a position, he will take you. This is how they look at it outside the world, outside the West. They're very aware of this. And religio-nationalism also has a secondary effect of letting people escape throughout the world outside the West, where we just downplay religion such that it doesn't matter, but it does. It's like we have it in our sort of side alt-right conversations. But in general society, no one's asking your religion. But in other parts of the world, it does matter. In India, Hindus are persecuting Christians. You can go to the Voice of the Martyrs. You can see this. It's not just the Muslims, even though they are the craziest ones, right? In Burma, for example, Buddhists and Muslims are fighting. They don't get along. I wonder why. In in several parts of Africa, different sort of pagan ideologies are fighting because this pagan god or goddess believes this is good, and this pagan god or goddess believes that's good, and the tribes are trying to act out what they don't believe. And here now in the United States, ironically, white people are fighting based on belief. The liberals and the liberal feminists and the feminazis and the uber globalists, they're white. They look like us. But they really don't think the way we think. Is it because clearly ethnicity is not an effect in this? What it
Right,
is
yeah,
is
there are white crazy liberals and there are white crazy Christians. So it's you know it's more of a effect of the culture, or some would say Jewish influence, perhaps. But
Jewish is a good example, and we see this actually in history. Every 20 years or so, up until I guess World War II, a majority Christian nation is kicking out the Jews. Why is this? Because according to their belief system, the non-Jews are goyim, we can manipulate their system. So naturally, the Jews end up on top of society. It's not because they're necessarily better than you, though, apparently they have higher IQs, but it's because they stick together and they are against you. Now, in our societies, in Christian societies, we have another habit, and this is probably what makes Christian societies weak. Christianity is tolerant. The Enlightenment periods happened all in Christian countries because if you don't believe, a Christian isn't inherently going to kill you. Outside of a sort of dictatorship theocracy, Christians will let the non-Christian in their midst alone and give him the benefit of the doubt to such an extent that even in Catholic Spain, they're letting in migrants up until the migrants go crazy. And so I think, especially for majority Christian societies, if they define themselves as Christian, if they set their boundaries and their rules as Christian, like we will not deviate so far from this, speech over here that Jesus said, they will have finally a sort of set of guidelines where they can exclude people, dude, you can't live here, and include people, oh, those Christians in Egypt, they're getting killed. Well, let them come.
Right. Well, I think that brings up a good point because a lot of people would say, well, we had a Christian nation and somehow we still ended up getting to this point. So, and they might say, well, that's a failure of the Christian state. Do you think there's something built into Christianity that is sort of this like acceptance? Some people would say turn the other cheek, or they're willing to tolerate people who are different from them to their detriment. Can you speak on that?
Yes, I do. And I think that's exactly why Christians in particular need religio-nationalism in making it official, in making it law. Your tolerance has a defined point of end. And that is a great security. Our various attempts to westernize Islamic societies only get so far because they have that book, which is actually a part of the government, and it says no, and it has a definitive no. Turn the other cheek is not a definitive no. If Christian societies want to preserve themselves, they need to put in definitive no's based on their religious ideals, and they need to be able to say, we are not doing this because we are Christian. Do you see that? It'll be a great security for them in terms of creeping Sharia, in terms of radical feminism. Well, your guy's just suppressing all the women, therefore XYZ. It'll be a full stop that Christian societies do not have right now. And
Right.
just to give the other look, other religions generally don't have a problem with this. I was talking with a Sikh taxi driver the other day. He said, absolutely, we are a nation. If you gave Kashmir to us, the border region probably would be solved. We've been buffering the Hindus and the Mughals, the Muslims, since our existence. And, no one, if you talk to anyone of any religion, really, no one really seems to have a problem with this. Now, as you very well know, I was talking to an atheist who was an American, and he said, what about me? If America becomes a Christian state, do I have to leave? What's going on with my rights? Am I going to have to stand
Well,
outside and
that
accept
was going to
Jesus?
be my next question. Are you
Yeah.
allowed to change or shed your religion inside the religio-nationalist state?
Well, that's when I go back to it's not necessarily a theocracy. Religious nationalism, as far as I'm concerned, is simply the encouragement of people with the same belief to live in the same defined borders or within the same defined borders and define that border according to the belief. With that being said, the peoples within the borders will still manifest laws based on their ideals. So, actually, if you go to a Buddhist state like Thailand, they're just about all Buddhists. You cannot, say anything bad about the Buddha in Thailand. You will go to jail because everyone in Thailand is Buddhist and you can't make fun of the Buddha. But besides that, you can basically do whatever you want because the Buddhist religion is not a suppressive religion. It's a very tolerant religion. It's only because they acknowledge themselves as a Buddhist state that they can say, you cannot make fun of the Buddha. You cannot, build a bajillion mosques or whatever. They put a limit on it. And they allow mosques because Buddhists are very tolerant. But because they are officially a Buddhist state, they can make laws in accordance with preserving that identity. And I imagine Christian states would be quite similar.
Well, maybe, but as you said before, Christian states lend themselves to democratic forms of government,
Hmm.
which means it's a little different than the Eastern traditions, because when you have people, if you allow people to change their religion, then there's the possibility that they will vote to change the government as well. And
I
so,
think
yeah,
I think therein lies a failsafe. Maybe you cannot vote unless you're willing to say you're Christian.
right, yeah, yeah. Well, I've said the same thing about if you were to make an ethno-nation work that allowed some that wasn't 100%, but maybe you could come into the country and you couldn't vote if you're non-white, or I think that is kind of a good way to limit the growth of this out of control Leviathan feminist government that we see in the West.
I, I think this
Just
is out of control Leviathan, now feminist, but arguably always sort of gynocentric left, is honestly, I think this is a large reason a lot of the blacks we have here are having the troubles they do today. I think, I mean, I don't see why at the 50s, when they had two parent households, when they had their own businesses, they didn't integrate then. That would have made a lot more sense than us hoping and praying that they'll integrate now. Do you see that? And I think what happened was we fed the bears. I'm sure you know the analogy. Instead of leaving them to sort of struggle and work, which they were doing, we instead moved them all to cities, gave them welfare, gave the mother's welfare such that it's actually in her financial interest to have as many babies as possible, and allowed the propagation of a counterculture, all right, which was the sort of ace in the hole in terms of black destruction, right? The hip hop, fight the police music. It's cool to be a gangster. Counterculture, where if you go into an urban city, it's like, yeah, he's so cool. He just got out of jail. This is not normal thinking, regardless of how intelligent you might be. Right? It's sort of known that you don't want to go to jail. I mean, even the cat knows that it doesn't want to go in the cage, and
yeah,
yet they think it's cool. And this is, I honestly do believe, this is a product of welfare and letting them spiral into a ridiculously um, degenerate way of thinking or degenerate culture that just would not have happened if we kept them in church.
I think you're right. With regards to the black community, um, that there's been so much destruction based on them losing their values. And I'm an atheist. I consider myself technically an atheist, but I have Christian values. And I used to think, well, religion is basically this um, force in the world that causes uh, people to believe in superstition, is
Hmm.
essentially it. And I'm now realizing, well, maybe that was true for me. It's not necessarily true for other people. And the blacks, especially because they have a lower IQ, I think they benefit a lot more from things like religion and like Christianity. And I hear black speakers sometimes, and I do kind of have this admiration for their zeal, if you will, because when they believe in something strongly, man, they're just on fire. And this is the like standard, the stereotypical like black preacher, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of what you were talking about when you were saying Malcolm X, etc.
Yeah, they're definitely charismatic.
They're very
Um,
charismatic, and it's I can respect that. Um, yeah, I guess I would say when I think about racism and nationalism, I think a lot of people conflate the two. It's like, well, if you don't want people of other ethnicities in the country, that means you like hate other groups or something. And for me, that's not true at all. I have a lot of respect for them, but uh,
I
I
think
think
it
I
comes
think
more so
because
to terror.
you naturally see this like segregation with say white flight, and
Hmm,
I don't think that that's just because of
they're black. I think it is
yeah.
terror. I mean, Stalin said something along the lines of nothing for men's opinion like terror. What you're seeing, as we saw in the Roman Empire, for example, all the blacks became jihadists. You now just don't like black people because you don't know and you don't feel safe. And so, with regard to Muslims especially, liberals always have this argument, well, only 2% of Muslims or 5% of Muslims are terrorists. Okay, well, you tell that to a mother and her child who sees a Muslim and say that is a 5% chance that person wants to kill you. How she's going to feel? She's not going to want to be around the person.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly that's the thing people don't get is that there's this risk element. You know, it's
hmm,
not that I think, oh, this person is definitely going to want to kill me or harm me in some way.
it's
Um,
just a risk. That's
yeah,
natural though. You are risk averse. You care about your life.
yeah,
And as blacks spiral in America into the sort of, I guess Chicago is like the blaming the Chicago culture. Of course, we associate them with violence, and even if it's only 1% or however many percent, 6%, I think, black men will do something crazy. That's it's just I'd rather not take that risk. However, I see that risk seems coherent to increase as a negative culture spreads. Blacks can be productive in society if they believe in productive values. And likewise, when you have high IQ people, the same risk is there. China has a very big problem wherein, they are Western Chinese are Uyghurs, these are jihadi Muslims, and they're high IQ jihadis. So now you have a jihadi that's just as smart as you.
yeah. Well,
So,
I think kind of it comes down to uh, and I don't think the science is very clear on this, but the degree to which cultural values might there might be a genetic element, or at least like there's a genetic susceptibility to leaning to certain ways. Because is it a complete accident that Christianity developed in white countries and white regions versus
mm,
you know Islam? And I'm not saying like there can't be
I have thought of this.
cross,
In
but
fact,
yeah, what do you think?
this is part of what I'm writing about, what I call racism. The thing about Islam was that they were a land army. Let's go back. All of Rome. Rome is North Africa, from Morocco to Egypt. Rome is the Fertile Crescent, from what we now call Palestine to basically Turkey. This is all Rome. No one's aware of race. Islam burst out of Arabia. It's a land army. It conquers everything not on the other side of the water. And this isolates Europeans. You see that. It isolates Europeans and Christianity for the first time. The line is drawn at race geographically
When
for
is this? What
1500
about when is
years.
this?
This is in this, I guess, the 700s. This happened. Islam burst out of Arabia, conquered all of North Africa, conquered all the Fertile Crescent, and by the end of that century, Moors are invading Spain. They're fighting the Spanish for 800 years. By the end of that century, North African pirates are dominating the Mediterranean. So this is now our experience with blacks for 1500 years. By the end of it, Moor means black, Moor means Muslim. We hate Moors.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly people who won't distinguish between like Arab and black, because aren't there black and white Arabs? Am I having that right?
Arabs now.
Yeah.
But now talk about imagine what we were saying about security. You don't necessarily think he's bad, but there's that 6% chance, there's that 2% chance. Now let's go back and put ourselves in the shoes of our forefathers living in Spain or France. There's way more than a 6% chance. Your cousin just got kidnapped and sold into slavery in North Africa. Everyone jumping on the boats, the Barber Pirates, they're all blacks. There's like a 50% chance. And this lasts 55 generations. You see what I'm saying? How does that affect the way we look at ourselves? How does that affect the way we look at them?
Yeah. Well, but then there's also the blacks, like sub-Saharan, who were sort of just living in their own uh,
That may be for low
world,
IQ,
like
but that doesn't
below
make us
below
hate
North
them.
Africa, if you will.
Yeah, that may be because of low IQ, but that doesn't make us hate them. That doesn't make us feel you don't feel unsafe around stupid people. You
No,
don't.
no, no. I think. Well, it depends on where you're talking. Maybe in Europe, what you say is true. I guess in America, it's sort of you know
Hmm,
just the gangster culture. Uh, that
that's
really depends.
reviving that
I'm sorry. What?
mentality. The gangster culture is definitely reigniting our sense of insecurity and dislike. But the thesis that I'm writing, where I'm arguing, is this sense of insecurity, this sense of dislike, was ingrained in our culture because of 1500 years of jihad.
Right. Like you. Yeah. Like colonial. People
Where did we
always
get the
rail
idea for
against.
colonialism?
I'm sorry.
Where
What?
did we so where did we get the idea for colonialism? Where did we get the idea of chattel slavery?
Right.
Liberals will tell you that we just woke up crazy one day and decided to take over the world. Well, that's kind of sort of not what happened. What kind of sort of happened was that in 711 AD, Moors invaded Spain. They took over half of Spain. They killed like half of everyone, and they just kept killing for 800 years. And around that same time, Barber pirates sold somewhere, well, it depends on who you ask, anywhere between 3 and 15 million white people into slavery into North Africa. And the only reason we survived is because we were fighting, and for the early part of that, losing and then winning. And by the time we finished that period, we're no longer peaceful.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
And it seems
And
like
but
people don't talk about the uh, Islamic colonialism because uh, then they would actually have to uh, get to the truth. They would have to like see that okay, that it's not just one side oppressing the other. It's just a
we,
conflict that has been going on for most of history. Um,
Islam is unique. This is a conflict that's been going on for 1400 years. And I truly believe, I mean, like I said, I'm doing my thesis on this, jihad and the origin of racism. I do believe that it is because all the Romans who look different, all the black Romans, were within a generation jihadists actively trying to kill all the white Romans, that the white Romans had to distinguish themselves in the most obvious and practical way in order to be safe. I
right.
truly believe that
It's
making
like
this distinction over 55 generations cements in the cultural and popular psyche what we now call racial division.
hmm yeah. If you walk down an alley, you see a guy in a turban, and you're a Roman. Uh, you don't want to take any chances.
Yeah, now let's take out the turban. Remember, all the jihadis are black.
Right.
Now,
Right. Right.
this might, yes, you see a black guy. Now, I don't know how much this plays into science, but it might have caused an evolutionary racism. And I haven't looked into this part. I'm not a geneticist, but I do know that we fear snakes, right? Humans, we fear snakes because throughout our evolution, snakes are eating us. And something in our genetic code has taught us you need to fear snakes because they eat you. It is possible that 1500 years of jihad has put in, particularly continental European genes, you need to not like black people because they kidnap you. It's possible. I don't know how long that takes. This is like a loose theory that I've come across because microevolution has been discussed with in terms of blacks in America. 400 years of chattel slavery has affected their metabolism. They build muscle ridiculously fast, and they do have a different way of thinking. All right, it is sort of like we're trying to push away from this now, but it is kind of ingrained that white people are better on you, and there's a theory that it's not just cultural. It may be the effect of the culture on the epigenetic development. How much of this is true, how much it plays, I don't know, but it's worth noting that our bodies, our genetics respond to the interface we have with the world prior to passing genetics on. So it may be now that particularly continental Europeans, it is ironic that the Germans and the Scandinavians are far less quote unquote racist than the Spanish and the French and the Italians, right? But it could be now that continental Europeans do have a genetic dislike for black people. But if they do, it is because of the 1,500 years of violence they experienced at the hands of these people. And this is important to know because it deals with white guilt, right? We are so evil. We left the world and we just conquered everyone and we just killed everyone and we just enslaved everyone. And no one was doing anything to us. We did it all on our own. No, that's not what happened. We survived jihad, more Barber Turk jihad for 1,500 years. By the end of the 1,500 years, we're crazy now.
Yeah, I mean, people always talk about, people on the left at least. Well,
Hmm.
they'll talk about skin color. They'll reduce racism to skin color, and there's just so much more to race. Now,
Hmm.
fundamentally, like race, I guess it doesn't have to have anything to do with your values. Uh, it's primarily an adaptation to the uh, the environment, the climate, and so on.
Hmm.
Thousands of years of evolution. But yeah, like you say, epigenetics. It does seem like now we're finding out evolution happens more quickly than we thought, and
Yes.
so I just sort of wonder. And you see, like as blacks in America have, I guess, bred with some of the whites and had their own history in America. Like the blacks here are so different than blacks
In
in
Africa.
Africa. Yeah.
It's
So
actually ironic if you look at it. A lot of the sub-Saharan African economies are developing at ridiculous rates, like 6%, 12%. Ethiopia, which apparently has a ridiculously low IQ, is developing at like 12% a year. They have cities now.
is
What's
that
going on?
are there whites coming in there?
Not really. What I mean, they were encouraged. We brought them to our schools and sent them back, or at least the smart ones. We brought them to our schools and sent them back. But what I think is happening, this goes into the development of people generally speaking. The IQ map suggests that northern peoples have higher IQ than southern peoples, generally speaking. And most theorists say that this is because the changing seasons and the cold environments forced you to plan over your evolution. Wherein people living in the Congo or in, Southeast Asia, for example, they had food year round. They didn't have to live together in small areas. They didn't have to store food. They didn't have to calculate growth. For the most of sub-Saharan Africa, you literally can just like walk outside, grab a chicken, and pick an apple. You don't really got to struggle like that.
Yeah.
I think
You don't have to plan
I
for the winter and whatever.
No, you don't have to do any of that. I think now, however, the absolute wealth that the northern societies have generated has instilled in them an ambition wherein though they don't have to struggle, they are struggling because they want our standard of living. And I gotta say, those economies are growing very fast. I have trouble believing that Ethiopia is having 12% growth a year on an IQ of like 70 or 80 or whatever it was. I think perhaps this may be changing. And I do also think a lot of this has to do with the religion. It's quite ironic that those countries that are mostly Muslim, Somalia, are still in chaos, are still not building cities, or those countries that are Christian are developing rapidly. Angola kicked out the Muslims last year, and they haven't had a violent incident since. Rwanda is the same thing. Rwanda, which had the genocide, which by the way was a religious division. They say Hutus and Tutsis, the Hutus killed the Tutsis or whatever. What no one talks about is that the religion, the tribe killing the other tribe was a Muslim tribe. And the reason the whole area knew to go killing so fast was because the announcement to kill the other tribe was announced over the minarets. This is how they were able to organize so fast. They didn't like seed it out, over time secretly on this date we're going to get up and kill everyone. No, one day the Imam came outside the mosque, went on the minarets, and said, "Kill all the other people," and they killed them. That's how that worked out. And since then, they've gotten rid of these negative religions, and they're downplaying paganism. Ironically, as GDP in Africa is on the rise, and this is substantial, such that I'm actually thinking of going and investing there. Christianity in Africa is on the rise. What do you know? It's like they read the Bible and they want to go to work.
Fascinating. Um, so let's start to wrap up. I guess, what do you think about the Trump movement, and would you say Donald Trump is a religio-nationalist?
No, Donald Trump is a realist. He's definitely not an idealist. Uh, and I think he gets a lot of backlash, Christian backlash, the white backlash, as these things are not typically divided in mainstream society. Of people who feel that we are, losing. Everyone gets affirmative action. Everyone has a better chance of getting a job. Also, men, if you really want to think into it, I saw in some statistic that men are like 20% more likely to vote for Trump. So he's just a manifestation of that. And also, one thing I wanted to talk about in terms of blacks, particularly developing society, I think a lot of it has to do with testosterone. We don't talk about it much. The IQ map is something that we like. It does feel good. But what people are willing to come out and say is that black bodies have more testosterone than other bodies. They have like the most
Mm,
testosterone, and this
yes.
has both physical and psychological or behavioral effects. Testosterone is a behavioral chemical. Physically, it means that you have slimmer hips. It means you have flatter forehead. It means you develop muscles ridiculously fast. That's what testosterone does. But testosterone also has some behavioral effects. Testosterone increases aggression. Testosterone decreases patience. We know this, and everyone knows this. And at the same time, all universities will come out and say blacks have the most testosterone.
Mm,
I actually do think a large part of this has to do with why A, they're so charismatic when they speak. You see that? Even
yes.
in other things, why do white women like black men? Well, they do. If we go back to the sort of primal alpha male behaviors, aggression, lack of patience, willingness to get rough.
Yeah, and it just struck me that it's a cycle too, because the when the black men uh, don't stick around to raise their kids, well, I think it's been shown that when a father is around a child, the testosterone goes down in the body. So
Hmm.
that's probably contributing to the cycle, and they get more testosterone, and
That would make sense
yeah,
because testosterone makes you competitive. It is the dominance gene. When the father is in the house, I think your body will submit to the child's body will naturally submit to the father. Or even if it's social, it's just by having a bigger alpha male around all the time, you cannot exercise that dominance chemical, so the body produces less of it. That would make absolute sense. And I think, honestly, I mean, this is coming from my experience traveling. I honestly think the lack of development in African countries has a lot more to do with testosterone. Blacks just don't work together. I've spoken with very intelligent blacks who can have a good conversation so long as everyone's getting along, but they don't have this patience to sit around and disagree the way we do. And this is horrible in terms of building society, no matter how high your IQ is.
mm,
They
yeah,
have this a fuse where they will just get up and get physical,
yeah,
or unless they've been trained against it. Um, and I think the testosterone, the ridiculous by comparison, the ridiculous levels of testosterone blacks have has been their biggest inhibitors. If they can discipline it, as they seems that they now are, it drives them and makes them charismatic, and they can do a lot. But I personally, based on what I've seen, and the IQ map is there. But I've met some pretty intelligent blacks who can sit down and have a conversation, who are in class with me, they're studying with me, uh, and I don't understand why the societies they come from are poor until something pisses them off.
oh yeah, I've noticed that pattern too.
So I think it's just, I really do think this is the actual manifestation of what feminists call toxic masculinity. Ironically, they'd have us go all the way around and, be cover boy. But I think this is the actual, if you want toxic masculinity, go to Nigeria, where after, three back and forth on a negotiation, the guy just looks at you, curses you out, and is ready to burn your house down. So, that's the actual manifestation of it. Um,
Yeah.
go ahead.
It's almost like the world would really benefit if white people adopted Sharia and black people adopted Christianity. Wouldn't the world just be a great place?
Probably not. There's actually, you may be interested. There's a book. I'm sure you can Google it. It documents Hitler's secret fascination with Sharia. Like he wishes the Germans had adopted this aggressive religion, and he had like this vision of a world dominated by Aryan Muslims.
Right.
So that would be an interesting read. But I mean, in terms of, we really didn't talk. We just went all over the place. We really didn't focus on religio-nationalism that much at all. But in order to sum it up, I do think that religion is the biggest influencer on personal ideals. Therefore, if people within the same physical or sovereign space adhere to the same religion, then the ideals of that society, though there be debates and disputes, would not vary so much that we are running around Washington, D.C. dressed in red and black, breaking stuff, because we have common grounds. There would be some societies in a religio-nationalist system that are extremist, Sharia societies, for example. Atheist communist societies to a point. The Chinese Atheist Party took power by the Maoist Revolution, killing everyone. But being atheists, they're able to apply science and they apply what works and what does not work. So, the societies would differ based on the ideals that manifest, based on the common religion. Atheists tend to be very scientific, they believe in evolution. And what do you know? The atheist societies that exist, China and the other largely majority atheist states like Czech Republic, they are making their laws based purely on science. That has, it goes their other way. There's a joke. A Chinese boy sees his classmate gets hit by a car and says to himself, great, there's one less guy I'm competing with, right? Because apparently he doesn't believe in anything. But, that's sort of the extreme of it. But generally speaking, atheist societies would do good. They'd make laws based on evolutionary science and other things, and they'd prosper. Christians societies would make their laws based on their beliefs, and they'd be generally tolerant, but they'd be able to say no to intolerable ideals. Buddhist societies would be like Thailand, and Hindu societies would be like Hindu, where they basically just don't like monotheists. But so long as you're not loud, you're okay. I think relative to ethno-nationalism, especially in consideration of the epigenetics and the recent development of Africa, which is just madness to me. Like, uh, I don't know how that's happening. How they went 20 years from shooting each other in the head to building cities, but they did. Though the fact is, they did. I think relative to ethno-nationalism, religio-nationalism would allow for the transfer of productive and like-minded people. It would stop religious minorities from being persecuted by allowing them to leave. And it would protect our societies by facilitating the dismissal for anyone who did not agree with our ideals. Our liberal feminists could actually go live in Sweden, all right, if Sweden became like this sort of mother goddess liberal state, right? And America was a Christian state. Our liberal feminists could actually go live there, and their Christians who feel like they're under attack could come here. It'd be a very smooth, constantly transitioning society.
Very good. Yeah. Well, I don't have too much more to add.
Hmm.
I don't think really our positions are that different. I mean,
I remember this
we're
back
both
and forth.
very opposed to globalism. Um, so uh, we can take comfort. I think,
Hmm.
in my opinion, if we were to get either religio or ethno nationalism, um, it would sort of be a hop, skip, and a jump, and
I remember our back and forth on
mhm,
that.
yeah,
And I guess the point I was really trying to drive home was that unlike ethno-nationalism, I feel that religio-nationalism is more secure into generations to come. If we were today to send all the non-whites out of America and Europe, send all the whites out of South Africa, make sure all the Asians are in Asia or whatever. Okay, so the societies may generally have coherent ideals for now. However, liberal ideals and the various weird religions that go with it, as we see, all the liberals, they're Satanists, they're whatever, right? These are very aggressive belief systems. The person who believes this is actively and constantly trying to convert the other people and suppress the rights and ideals of other peoples. The person who converts to Islam is actively and aggressively and even, insidiously trying to promote Sharia law and intentionally having more babies than you.
Yeah.
Only by way of religio-nationalism can we preserve our societies from these behaviors, because the behaviors and the ideals and the religion that cause their behaviors don't care about the race. Once a white guy is a crazy liberal feminist, he's going to yell at you in the street and call you a white male, even though he's a white male, and he's just a contagion. He's like a virus in the society. We need a way to get him out. Religion-nationalism, over the long term, facilitates the constant removal of such people, while facilitating the constant importation of people who hold our ideals.
Right, and I'm all for experimentation. I mean,
Hmm.
and to some extent, I'm an anarchist. Like, I would like to get to
Hmm.
that world. That's a different conversation. But the more decentralization we have, the better. I'd love to see more religio states and ethno states, and you know, because the best way to determine which is better is
It's to
to
test
is to
it.
test it. Yeah.
That's yeah. I
And
think
you
if we
study
look at
history, so you are
yeah.
contributing to kind of that,
Excuse me.
yeah,
Yeah, the
the
history is
study.
why I'm really more for the religio state. Uh, this may be because I'm actually a Christian, all right? So I'm gonna put that out there. This may
Okay,
be
yeah,
straight
I
up.
could have asked you that in the beginning, but
Yeah,
good to know.
yeah. What I'm about to say may be because I'm actually a Christian. I'm just going to put that out there. But I can't help but notice that even in the African countries, or uh, where the people convert to Christianity, all of a sudden they become productive. Uh, and, I know you don't believe in any sort of spirituality, but those who do from any religion will say that that which you commune with will affect your character and it will change you. Now, I guess from a cultural sort of societal study point of view, it could be that just because you're reading this book every day, you eventually start to adopt the characteristics of that book, right? So that would also make sense. Um, but it just doesn't make sense that all of a sudden, the southern part of Nigeria, Nigerians, for example, when they come here, they are making an average between 60 and 70,000 a year coming out of Nigeria. How is that possible? What about that IQ? Well, what do you know? These Nigerians are going to school. They are very likely to become doctors in our society. They are all from southern Nigeria where they're Christian. It's the northern Nigerians that are sitting on the floor, eating with their hands, where they are Muslim. The religious perspective may be that perhaps God blesses those who likes him with, intelligence, but that wouldn't explain the intelligence of the Chinese, would it?
Yeah,
So perhaps it's more likely that what you spend your time doing does build or degenerate your IQ. And that's been proven actually quite a few times. People who look at porn a lot come out like, 5 IQ points stupider. Uh, so, it could be that the
is that a
behavior,
plug for NoFap? No.
it could be that the behavior on an epigenetic and developmental stage, the early, excuse me, the early life of a Buddhist, for example, is sitting around chanting and not really doing that much math. And what do you know? In their states, they have lower IQs than in the northern Asian states, where their early lives are doing calculus by the seventh grade. You got this guy studying, 6 hours a day. What is the effect of that on average IQ? What is the effect of the fact that in Christian societies, or majority Christian societies, the children generally are encouraged to go to school by the time they're 4, versus in the northern half of Nigeria, the Muslim society, they sit around and just read Quran. And, I'm sure you've seen them in madrasas bobbing back and forth, just memorizing words all day. They're not challenging their brains. What does that have to do with the average IQ? And why is it that parents who are intellectually stimulated throughout their life are more likely to have children with higher IQs than them, whereas a parent on welfare, i.e., Black Americans, right, are likely to have children whose IQs are less than them because they never had to think? I really think that we're not weighting epigenetics enough on this. And
Yeah,
I think the
it's very
the
possible.
Nigerians coming in who make it through medical school at astounding rates are evidence of this.
Yeah, and I mean, I will point out to the white supremacists who are listening to this now,
Hmm.
the just people who are sort of on the ethno-nationalism side, like um, I will say that you need more than just a racial identity to have a society. Um, so uh, just knowing that you're white doesn't necessarily mean like you. Um, uh,
Turkey exists.
yeah, Turkey's a good point. Yeah,
Flat, it exists.
yeah. So that's just my point is that you do need some kind of backer to that, and that's usually been Christianity for whites, but and it's not always. It was paganisms and
That could be an interesting study. Looking at from a historical perspective, that kind of does add to the argument of the Swedish people, or the Norwegian people, and the Danish people, the Vikings, basically.
mhm.
It's quite ironic. As they were exposed to Christianity, it suddenly occurred to them that maybe farming and having a town is a better life than just pulling up on shore and killing everyone all the time.
Yeah,
I can't imagine that the guys put, it's cool, you're 6 foot, 10, and you have this huge axe, so it's cool to pull up on the shore and kill everyone. But I can't imagine that this guy who was doing this all day, every day, had the highest IQ. Whereas now they have very high IQs. I think something about the whole let's sit down and read and let's talk about stuff every day. And oh, Jesus was a craftsman. Let's pick up crafts. Really expounded upon the IQ, especially in terms of generational thinking.
hmm yeah. Davis Arini is one who talks about this. I illustrated one of his talks about Keck and the whole Pepe phenomenon, and so yeah, he talks about how the pagans they had this like um, they got that there needed to be a sacrifice, the blood sacrifice, etc.
Hmm.
But they didn't. I guess there was some um, grace that was lacking. That's made up in Christianity.
Grace, as in sitting still. No,
Yeah, not
the only. Hmm.
yeah, not killing people.
I think the only real thing, personally, my opinion, having studied with several people, having worked with several people of different races and religions, I think the only real thing on the racial end that affects behavior is testosterone, as evident to the race. Blacks have the most testosterone. East Asians have the least testosterone. East Asians are the most passive. It's even the stereotype, the quiet Chinese guy doesn't say anything. Studies. And I think this affects behavior in terms of race more than anything. However, I'm not going to say testosterone is a bad thing. I'm going to say that, if a guy has a lot of testosterone, he definitely needs to be in a more constructive society. And quite frankly, I hate to say it, but looking at the state of many Western societies today, I would say that an injection of testosterone might be a good thing, so long as it's done under the right ideals. But um, I think this is the real difference in why societies seem to develop differently alongside race. I think it's just the inability of blacks outside of a religion or a way of thinking that convinces them to sit still and talk. I think the inability of them to sit still and talk stems from just having ridiculously high testosterone. That same testosterone that makes them build muscles really fast also makes them fight really fast. That doesn't
Right.
mean.
And I've talked about too how,
Hmm.
I joked about white supremacy. I'm not a supremacist because it's just a different environment that they've adapted to, and so
Yeah.
I can't really say, oh, this is objectively better. It probably is objectively better for the construction of
Society.
civilizations.
Yes.
Yeah, but um,
Fortunately, evolution
if
doesn't care about that.
but if we're like in the Olympics, I don't think it's objectively better. So
I mean, I think honestly, in our society now, for example, had we truly integrated blacks at the end of the 50s, who, in my mind, there's no way they had ridiculously low IQs. Okay, you don't establish the Black Panther Party to such a state that Hooger is like honestly afraid of you, right? You don't establish the Black Panther Party to that level within within another country on low IQs. I think they've gotten stupider over time because of welfare and liberal media and just not going to school. I don't believe they always had low IQs. It just doesn't make any sort of sense to me. If you study the history, Black Wall Street was very successful. These guys were founding their own universities. We integrated them now, but you don't do that on a society of low IQ people. I think we made them stupid. I hate to put it that way,
yeah,
but I
that would be
think
worth studying, I think.
yeah.
So can you will you let us know when you've published your thesis and everything? I think that'd be interesting to get an
Well,
idea.
I'm starting the thesis process now. As you can imagine, going to it's a very prestigious school I go to, but it's also a very liberal school. My initial pushback that this is what caused, basically, I said Islam caused racism, right? So, as you can imagine, the initial pushback is no, it can't be religious. It must be politically motivated or militarily motivated. And I've just gone back to the thesis advisor saying, actually, no. In that time, these were exactly the same thing. And so that's going to be one chapter. And I guess where I'm going with this is that this process is going to take some time. I'm expecting 9 months at least.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have you on before then, but I
No
really
problem, man.
appreciate talking to you.
I guess you can call me D, by the way, because that makes sense. It'd be weird to be talking to someone and not have a way to refer to
Not
them.
have a
So,
D. Yeah, okay,
yeah.
sounds good.
All right. So, nice talking to you, Matt.